And then types of mutashaabih. Again, this is Raghib al-Isfahani. He says there's that which humans are utterly incapable of understanding, such as the reality of Allah's attributes, and the aspects of the unseen, the knowledge of which He has reserved for Himself, such as the timing of the Day of Judgment, etc. And there are mutashabihat that people can arrive at an understanding of it through research, an exertion of effort, and this is really, when you broaden the meaning of mutashabih to refer to the mujmal of any type. And then there's a mutashabihat, the knowledge of which only the most knowledgeable of scholars attain, الراسخون في العلم. And there you come to the difference of opinion about whether one should stop on the word Allah in the verse where it says, no one knows its meaning or its interpretation except Allah. Are you required to stop there? Or can you join وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ? Because there is a statement made by Ibn Abbas where he said, I'm from the رَاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ who know the meaning of the mutashabihat. And that's not really the core meaning of mutashabihat that's intended in the verse, because those who are pursuing the ta'wil of those things are people who are striving after that which is not humanly understandable. But by a sort of tajawuz, you can say, okay, if you're talking about ambiguity and expand the scope of ambiguity to include the mujmal, then yes, there are some aspects of the mujmal that are fairly easy to find an explanation for, and there are others which are much more difficult, and Allah gives that to people who are firmly rooted in knowledge. They act upon their knowledge, and Allah raises them, and He bestows upon them this knowledge that is a gift to the pious. And finally, the question arises, why would Allah put mutashabihat in the Qur'an? And the first explanation or justification for it, various scholars have given various reasons, and I'll just mention two that are the most convincing to me. The first is that it's a test. So are you as a human being going to recognize your limitations, that there's a lot of things that you just can't fully comprehend, and so don't try to get into areas where you can't talk with any knowledge. So explaining the attributes of Allah, just stay away from that. And Ismail Faruqi, he gave what to me is one of the finest explanations for this whole issue in his book on Tawheed, its implications for thought. And I'll quote you verbatim, or I'll quote him for you verbatim. Well, actually, it's with tasarruf yasir, yani slight few words taken out here and there, but this is 95% his words. Anthropomorphism is inevitable if the question of the how of predication of the attribute is raised in the expectation of an answer similar to that, analyzing the relation of the predicate to the subject in the empirical world. Okay, let me explain that, because that may be kind of involved. Subject and predicate. Sentences are made up of subjects and predicates. So you say, steel is hard, the knife is sharp. So steel and knife are subjects, hard and sharp are predicates. So if you say, Allah is alim, or Allah is sabur, then here's where you start to develop problems with regard to certain descriptions of Allah. Anthropomorphism is inevitable if the question of the how, of predication of the attribute. So in other words, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, how did Allah istawa on the Arsh? How is Allah's hand? How is Allah's face? These kinds of questions. So predication of the attribute is that face is being attributed to Allah, and then somebody is asking how. And the question is natural because that's part of how our brain works. Okay, but it's a big problem when the subject is outside of your realm of experience. So now to return to Faruqi's statement, he said, since the subject and the predicate are transcendent, the question itself is invalid. Once the lexicographic meaning of the predicate is known, in other words, the dictionary meaning, once the lexicographic meaning of the predicate is known and acknowledged and understood, and then denied, because hand and face, etc., the way we know them, they cannot be attributed to Allah in that way. So that's the meaning that he's talking about, denying. So once that's denied, it acts as a springboard for the mind to create a new modality for the predication in question, other than the empirical. In other words, your mind is looking for a way to understand hand, face, etc., istiwa, in some way that takes it out of our human experience. But no new modality is possible, precisely because it's outside of our experience. So you cannot conceive of how when it's outside of your experience. Therefore, the mind perceives the impossibility of empirical predication, while the understanding is still anchored to the lexicographical meaning of the term. The imagination is thus compelled to produce the needed modality once the denial of empirical predication and transcendence are both upheld. The transcendence is what's being upheld, not the denial of transcendence. It's the denial of empirical predication. In other words, relating the attribute to our experiences. So once you've denied that it can be related to experience and you have affirmed transcendence, then your mind is searching for a modality. In this suspense, an intuition of transcendence is obtained, not unlike that of infinity and sensory inexpressibility engendered by the arabesque. The arabesque are these fancy geometric patterns that we see as a recurring feature of Islamic architecture, etc. And you have this sense that whatever the pattern is, it's established, and then you have a frame, and clearly the pattern is going to, in your mind's eye, it extends past the frame of whatever is limiting it. So it is a visual kind of meditation upon infinity. The lexicographic meaning serves as an anchor while the imagination soars in search of a modality of the meaning in question, a modality that is impossible to reach. That's on page 26 from his book, Tawheed. And it's very fancy language, but when you decode it, it has some nice ideas in it. And Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.